I have no science background whatsoever, but I did read, and someone said that a very large source of oxygen on the planet is our ocean. And I've also been reading that we're having an issue with ocean acidification and ocean dead zones and coral reef bleaching. Does the animal agriculture have anything to do with ocean acidification, ocean dead zones, and coral reef bleaching?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's clearly connected in a whole lot of ways. Most of the runoff from the land, I mean, everything that we do on the land ends up in the water. And the huge amounts of pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, all these toxic wastes, plus all the nitrogen that we're pouring on the fields in the Midwest and everywhere in this country, it's called nutrient-rich runoff, which sounds good, but it's really terrible because it goes in and it kills off. It causes algae blooms, which suck the oxygen out of the water, so fish cannot live. They just die off. And we have these huge dead zones now because of animal agriculture, because of the use of so much fertilizer. Back in the 1910s, two scientists in Germany discovered how to create nitrogen out of natural gas, and so that started the big boom where we started eating a lot. The population explosion and animal agriculture took off. Without that, we couldn't have this whole thing. It's the ability to create nitrogen from natural gas, to just keep using the same piece of land over and over again every year to grow corn and soy to feed to animals. That could never happen. In the past, we had to let the land lie fallow, let the nitrogen come back. You had to plow under leguminous plants to recharge the nitrogen. You don't have to do that anymore. And so this is destroying the oceans. Plus the fact we are overfishing the oceans, not just from fish, but we're fishing for plankton. Plankton create oxygen. The plankton are being strip mined. The fish are being strip mined, and so the oxygen. The power of the oceans to produce oxygen is being reduced by animal agriculture also. So the acidification also is connected to animal agriculture. And I think we see essentially, animal agriculture, these animals create so much manure, we don't know what to do with it, right? It ends up in the oceans, it ends up eventually in the water tables and other places. And so underlying all of this, I think it would be so great if we could have specials on TV that would kind of educate people about these things. But my father, I was raised in a family that owned a chain of newspapers, and I learned early on, actually, just sitting around the dinner table, I learned the rule, which is when you own media, you do not run any news that your advertisers are not going to like to see. Because they're going to bug you. They're going to say, I'm not going to advertise with you anymore if you run news items that tell them about this, And this is the essential thing, that the media is in many ways at this point completely controlled by these large corporations that don't want people to understand these basic connections that are pretty obvious, really, when you just look at this for a little while and see the connections. It doesn't take great scientists to understand this. It's pretty obvious, but no one talks about it because we're not supposed to actually solve these problems, because that would perhaps cause financial problems to certain individuals and corporations.
I would add to that also that it's not only land-based animal agriculture that is damaging oceans and coral reefs, but fish farming as well. When fish are wild and their waste is dispersed, the waste has various benefits, like as Hope mentioned, carbon sequestration. But when fish are hyper-confined, their waste is also confined, and it leads to the same problems with nitrogen and phosphorus as land-based agriculture. So that, for example, in Israel a couple of years ago, the government shut down 2 fish farms in the Red Sea because it found that the waste from those farms had damaged coral reefs, and they thought that the tourist industry was more important than the aquaculture industry. So fish farming is often touted as a silver bullet to solve some of these problems, but I think, as we'll discuss probably in some other examples during this panel, fish farming does not solve the problems either.
Yeah, I could tack on to the fish farming. It's absolutely true. It's basically just industrial confinement, like we do to land animals, to sea animals. I don't know if anyone's ever seen a fish farm, but I have been to a fish farm, and it's interesting because they often are very near, right by a water source. And you'll look at the water source, you know, the river or the area that they're on, the lake or the ocean, and you can see right into it. I mean, it's clear, like water should be to an extent. And then you look into where the fish farm is, and it's just muck. You can barely see in it. It's like deep and dark and disgusting, and it's because the fish are so crammed into these, you know, small pools. They're just living in their waste. The waste is so thick, they're just swimming in their own waste. And these places are just notorious for dumping an arsenal of antibiotics and other chemicals to try to keep the fish healthy enough in this muck to be able to slaughter them for food. So, you know, so yeah, fish farming is absolutely just environmentally horrible. And I did want to mention, too, going back to just water pollution, and we talked a little about dead zones, and I wanted to expand on that a little bit. So what happens is that we've concentrated all this waste from these millions of animals that we're keeping. And, you know, I see it in my area. I live in Sonoma County, which is about an hour north of San Francisco, and we have a lot of farming out there, dairy farming mostly, and other farming. And you can see these mountains of waste, and they'll put tarps and tires to hold down the tarps over it. And, you know, so it's just these mountains and mountains of waste. Sometimes there's waste lagoons. I know that pig farms and dairy farms will use waste lagoons where they have dredged an area and lined that area and put the wet manure, made the manure liquid, and it's just this lagoon of waste that is supposedly contained, but of course there's lots of leaching that happens, leaching through the plastic. When there's a heavy rain, there's overflow, so it's not really containing the waste. So all of this waste goes down into our groundwater, is going through the water systems and heading out the mouths of rivers. And like Will was explaining, it's high in nutrients, which sounds good, but not in those kinds of high concentrations. What happens is algae feeds on it. There's these algae blooms. It reduces the oxygen in the water and causes what's called eutrophication, which makes basically the water a dead area. There's no oxygen there, and aquatic life can't live. And these dead zones are getting huge. In North America, 48% of lakes are considered eutrophic, containing these excess nutrients. The second largest zone of coastal hypoxia, which is oxygen-depleted water, is found in the northern Gulf of Mexico, out with the outflow of the Mississippi River. So we have so much agriculture in the Midwest coming down the Mississippi. Pesticides contribute to this as well. And there's a huge area, tens of thousands of acres, that's just considered a dead zone. And we're seeing these at the mouths of rivers all over the world, and they're growing, and it's very dangerous. So just wanted to contribute to that.